It's thinking. Okay, we are live. We are ready to go.
All right, very good. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, commissioners. I want to open the September 1st special meeting of the Citrus Heights Planning Commission to discuss the Sunrise Tomorrow plan and the attached environmental document. Commissioner Conditional Engel, I'm sorry. Would you please say the pledge?
Salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance. We have no flag.
Is my screen sharing?
Mm-mm.
I wonder why it's not sharing. Okay, Janelle, if you want to continue, go ahead. For some
All
reason,
right.
Commissioner
Duker has a flag for us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Sorry about that, folks. I'm not sure why it wasn't sharing.
Stacy, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Engel,
Here.
Commissioner Magnowski,
Here.
Commissioner Nishimura,
I'm here.
Commissioner Turner Mike,
Here.
Commissioner Van Duker,
Here.
Vice Chair Flowers,
Present.
Chair Sheeler.
Present.
Thank you.
Next item, please.
Approval of minutes, approval of the July 28th, 2021 minutes.
I presume the commissioners had a chance to review them. Any comments of those minutes? Seeing none.
I move to approve.
Second. Commissioner Magnowski.
Chair Flowers.
Aye.
I'm sorry, Vice Chair Flowers. Sorry about that. Commissioner Engel,
Yes.
Commissioner Nishimura,
Aye.
Commissioner Turner Mike,
Aye.
Commissioner Magnowski,
Aye.
Commissioner Van Duker,
Aye.
Vice Chair Sheeler.
Aye.
Motion passed, minutes approved.
Next item, please.
Under public comment, under Government Code 54954.3, members of the audience may address the commission on any agenda item within the jurisdiction of the commission or on any agenda item. Those wishing to speak on non-agenda items will be called upon at the beginning of the meeting. Those wishing to speak against or for an item will be called upon after the presentation by the City Planning Department.
We have none at this time.
Thank you, Casey.
Thank you. Next item, please.
On regular calendar, we have Sunrise Tomorrow's specific plan overview. Staff will present an overview of the Sunrise Tomorrow plan to the Planning Commission. The specific plan was available for you guys to view. Project Planner, Casey Kempenaar.
Thank you, Chair and Commission. Casey Kempenaar, Planning Manager. As you know, the Sunrise Marketplace and the Sunrise Mall site have been a target of the city's economic development efforts for quite some time now. In 2019, the City Council, recognizing the importance of the mall property, adopted a general plan amendment which required development of a specific plan for the Sunrise Mall property, making sure we had a holistic view for this property to make sure we can achieve the highest and best use, achieve a lot of our community goals around economic development and community vibrancy. So that's why we're here. Over the last 2 years, you guys have been involved in one form or another, and we've been hard at work preparing our specific plan with our team of experts, which is led by Gensler, which is a world-renowned architecture and planning firm that does this exact type of project all over the country and the world. We've had 3 community workshops. We've engaged with mall ownership consistently throughout the whole process, and we have continued to do stakeholder engagement as we have moved through the process. So tonight we're here to share the draft specific plan in a fair amount of detail, the opportunity to ask questions and give feedback. Really, we want to make sure we're on the right track, as the next steps would be for the commission to, we would be coming to the commission to ask for a recommendation to the city council for approval. So tonight, logistics, we're going to have 2 distinct parts of the specific plan and try to kind of keep our specific plan separated from the EIR portion of it. If you have questions about the environmental impacts, we would advise saving that for the second half of the meeting. We're going to be at it for a while, so in between those 2 sessions, we're going to have a quick break. And so just a reminder, during the break, if you could just stay connected to Zoom and just mute yourself and turn off your camera for a few minutes, and then the chair will set up a 5-minute break wherever he thinks is appropriate, and then come back and we'll dive into the EIR. So tonight you will not be taking any action. You're not approving anything. It's more of a feedback and dialogue. And then again, at a later date, we'll be asking the commission to make a recommendation to the council. So with that, before I turn it over to James at Gensler, do you guys have any questions I can answer before we get started? Okay. James, sorry, I don't see you on the screen. James Dunsmore is with Gensler. He's the project manager for their team.
Thank you, Casey. Hopefully everyone can see the presentation on screen with the cover slide for the Sunrise Tomorrow specific plan. Great. So good evening, commissioners. It's really a pleasure to speak with you this evening about the Sunrise Tomorrow specific plan and present in a little more detail some of the specifics about the plan document itself. As Casey mentioned, we've been working with the city for some time now to prepare this, and it's really been a great collaboration and great effort by many people in the community and the city, and it's great to see the results tonight. So I hope we'll be able to answer some of your questions and get into some of the details. The project team, of course, this has been prepared on behalf of the city of Citrus Heights. And I'd really like to thank the city manager and all the city staff who've been engaged. They've really been a great partner for us. Gensler as the lead consultant in preparing the plan. It's been great to work with everyone at the city. Our team includes MXD, who prepared the economic and market analysis that we used in the first phase of the project and to help inform the types of uses that would be permitted by this plan. Farron Pierce, who prepared mobility analysis, and we have a member of their team on the call tonight. Mark Thomas, who prepared the civil engineering and infrastructure analysis, and De Novo Planning Group, who prepared the environmental analysis, and you'll be hearing from them later this evening on the Drafty Ir. So before we get into some of the details, of course, all of you on the commission know what a specific plan is, but for the benefit of any members of the public joining tonight, just a quick overview. A specific plan is a set of guidelines and regulations to streamline the development and provide certainty for what types of development could occur on the mall site. It's a proactive plan. The city chose to undertake this effort, and it's proactive and designed to mitigate the changing retail environment and more recently the effects of COVID and the pandemic. And it's a flexible framework to ensure hopefully the best possible outcome for the city, the community, and mall owners, and to allow the plan to be implemented over time and hopefully provide flexibility so that it can meet changing needs over the 20-year time horizon that it's envisioned to take to fully implement. And to put it in context with the other plans that the city has, of course, the general plan is the big picture vision, the aspirational vision for the city overall. The Sunrise Tomorrow specific plan, as a specific plan, would implement the general plan, but there are several other layers to the process. The plan envisions development agreements that would be undertaken before any individual projects could be proposed and reviewed and approved. So The specific plan is more on the big picture vision side, but provides more details than the general plan does. And the specific plan, of course, is available online at sunrisetomorrow.net for members of the public and, of course, commissioners to view. So the specific plan has 8 different sections, and we'll be going through each of them this evening. It's a little bit of a long presentation to get into a lot of details, but hopefully it'll answer most of your questions. And what I'd like to do, if it's all right with the chair and the commissioners, is just pause at the end of each section if there are any questions or comments about it. Hopefully we can answer those as we go through the presentation. So starting with the introduction, which is the first chapter of the plan, and the project purpose is, of course, to create a specific plan to guide the development of the Sunrise Mall property. It's intended to help realize the city's general plan vision and to transform the mall into a premier regional destination and flourishing center of community life where residents and visitors can shop, live, work, and play. And that was the language that the city developed at the start of this process, and that was our charge as the planning and design team to help facilitate a process that would lead to a plan to meet those goals. The project site is the Sunrise Mall property located at Sunrise Boulevard and Greenback Lane. It's about 95 acres today with about 1.4 million square feet of built area and over 6,000 parking spaces. And as you can see in the diagram, the property actually consists of multiple separate legal parcels, which actually have different owners. And the city does not own any of the property in the plan area, but like all the property in the city is responsible for setting the development standards for the type of development that can occur. Casey mentioned a little bit of the project history. Of course, the mall predates the founding of the city. The mall opened in 1971, and in many ways it's an impetus for people moving to the Citrus Heights area and helped to provide important revenue that allowed the city to incorporate in 1997. And it's really been since then an important part of the economic life of the city. In 2019, the council decided to set a strategic goal to look at how to improve the plan, and eventually adopted the general plan amendment requiring a comprehensive plan for the future of the mall. And in response to that, the city went out to select consultants. Gensler was selected, and we began the process in 2019. And since then, we've worked with stakeholders, members of city staff, members of other agencies, members of the community through workshops to develop the draft specific plan that was released last month, July 20th, or I guess a little over a month ago now. And the important thing is that this is really a community vision. It's the product of hundreds of people in the community getting involved in in-person meetings before the pandemic and virtual meetings since then, using the website that we've set up for the project to submit their comments. And the ultimate product here hopefully reflects what community members wanted to see in the project and really the vision that came out of that community-led process. Just a few numbers, to showcase kind of the breadth of the engagement. We had over 54 stakeholder interviews, over 300 people at our in-person workshop that was held in the old Sears building on the mall site. More than 200 people in the 2 virtual community workshops that have been held since then. People responding to the survey, engaging online, over 12,000 people visiting the website, and of people participating in the community workshop, over 82% said they were really excited for this process. They rated their excitement as more than a 7 out of 10 on a scale. So it's really been driven by what members of the community want to see. And these were the top priorities that emerged out of that process. People wanted to see central public space, a mix of retail, dining, and entertainment, employment opportunities, neighborhoods with a mix of housing, connections, including walkable streets and bike connections and ways to get around safely. And finally, one thing we heard throughout the process was everyone wanted to see something that's financially feasible, implementable, and adaptable. This was something we heard from the community and from the city as well. We don't want a plan that will just sit on a shelf. We want something that can can actually be implemented. And we've taken a lot of steps throughout the process to make sure that we're creating a plan that works from a financial feasibility perspective and meets the market demand for what developers may want to develop on this site. And just to leave you with one comment that really resonated with us from one of the community residents, she said, "The mall used to reflect the pride of the community through its events. We need to bring this back. This was the heart of the community." And that concept of the heart of the community, the heart of Citrus Heights, that's really at the center of the vision for the Sunrise Tomorrow specific plan. So before we go on to the next section of the plan, any questions about the process to date or the outreach that we've engaged in? All right, we'll keep going. So starting with the vision, as we said, the vision is really a new heart for Citrus Heights, and that's encapsulated in this vision statement. Sunrise Tomorrow transforms Sunrise Mall into a 21st century Main Street, creating a new economic engine and regional destination that supports high quality daily life for Citrus Heights. And that's, in a sentence, what the intent is of this plan. As you can see in this illustrative plan that shows one way that the plan could be realized and potential future build out, the plan envisions replacing the existing indoor enclosed mall with a new Main Street and outdoor space lined with mixed use buildings, retail, residents above, or offices. At the center of the plan, number 2, Sunrise Commons is a large open space that would be a space for events, but also for community members to use on a day-to-day basis. New employment anchors are envisioned throughout the site, indicated number 3. Entertainment anchors as well, things that could potentially be a movie theater, other types of entertainment venues. New hotels are envisioned. That was one area where we're seeing in the market analysis to be demand for hotel uses to support office and employment in the city. The current locations of the existing anchors could remain or could in the future be developed as other types of mixed-use developments such as employment or residential. Residential neighborhoods are generally located along the southern and eastern sides of the site, adjacent to the existing residential neighborhoods on the adjoining properties. The plan includes ample open space throughout, particularly along the southern edge of the property as a buffer between the development site and those existing neighborhoods, as well as a transit center right on Sunrise Boulevard that will help make it possible for people to get to this site, to go from this site to throughout the region without needing to drive and put more traffic on our streets. And that's an important part of the overall strategy for how we're getting people to and from the site in a sustainable way. The vision really has 5 big ideas, and we'll go through each of these quickly with just an image that shows how that could look on the site in the future. And this first one speaks to this idea of a community and regional destination. And you can see this is the view looking east, from Sunrise Boulevard towards that Sunrise Common space. And some of the types of amenities that would make this a community and regional destination: gathering space, an event tent where different types of community events could occur, diverse retail, indoor, outdoor dining, food hall, and other types of restaurants, and then the Main Street beyond. In terms of a green network, that's really critical to the concept throughout the site. It includes, from the Main Street, new tree canopy, green spaces, community plaza, and neighborhood green spaces. So a variety of open spaces with both hardscape, natural landscaping, play spaces to serve a variety of purposes throughout the site. Streets for people, we're envisioning a network of streets across the site that will have multimodal functions. Wide sidewalks, particularly along Main Street, shade structures and overhangs to provide a comfortable environment. We know many people like to go to the site today just to walk around inside the mall, and we want to continue to accommodate people who come here just for recreation. So shade trees, wide sidewalks, overhangs, raised crosswalks to make it safer and more visible for pedestrians, flexible streets that could be closed for events, sidewalk dining, and then a diverse mix of uses. Livable neighborhoods to help meet the housing needs of the city. This is the view from the southeast corner of the site, looking back towards the center here, and you can see that landscape buffer along the southern edge between the existing residential neighborhoods and the site. A diversity of housing typologies, family-friendly amenities, and kind of community recreation facilities are a part of that. Park and trail access, and then the enhanced transit center beyond, all within walking distance. And finally, the mall has always been an economic engine for the city, and it's really important for the city that continues as a jobs creator, as a tax generator for the city. And the plan envisions doing that by creating desirable creative office space that meets what the actual market demand is today, having housing for the workforce, having community amenities, hotels that will support businesses on site, food and dining to attract new types of employers in growing industries that are coming to the Sacramento region or that are here already and wanting to grow and looking for places to locate. And as you can see in this last overall view of the site, how each of those 5 big ideas comes together throughout the plan area to create that overall vision of a new heart for Citrus Heights. Any questions about the overall vision before we get into some of the more details of the framework?
Yes, James, this is Tom Sheeler. I think it's important that for those that are viewing, to emphasize that this is one vision of what this site could be. And you have to put your foot down and establish something then to do the environmental analysis. And given all the community input and the desires, the big ideas and whatever, this is what the plan was. But given the allowable uses on each one of the planning areas, this plan could change over time with new developers. So for those watching, I think it's important to understand that this plan is not locked in stone, and it could certainly change. But this was it was a beginning place to start with and to do the environmental analysis.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a very helpful point. And as we go through the next sections of the plan, I'll try to point out some of the elements that are fixed and some of the pieces of the plan that are more flexible and that could change over time. So the third chapter of the document gets into the framework and policies. These are the overarching kind of moves that go across the site. And one of the ways that the plan works is by establishing a development framework with different planning areas. So there are 6 planning areas envisioned across the site, and these allow us to tailor the types of development, the types of standards for height or building use to each of the different sub-neighborhoods across the site. And they also correspond to the different legal parcels that would allow the site to be developed over time. For each of those planning areas, a maximum development allowance is established in the plan document, and development allowances by use are established for each of those areas. So this is one element of the plan that is fixed in the sense that that is the maximum development that would be entitled or allowed under the specific plan with the existing proposed DIR, but it could also be amended if the city chose to do that. The plan also identifies development sites within each of these planning areas. So these are the actual locations where building could occur, and then the space in between is reserved for the on-site circulation network and open space. And this is a look at the land use framework, showing the types of uses that are allowed in each of these areas. In general, as I mentioned, residential is clustered more on the eastern and southern sides of the site, while the center of the site is more mixed use with the retail district, and employment uses focused in the center of the site and towards Greenback Lane. And just an example of some of those types of uses in each category: residential could include live-work units, condominiums, townhouses, row houses, multifamily housing, or senior housing are all the types of residential uses that could occur. Retail and restaurant uses could include, everything from, banks, stores, general retail, the types of stores that are in the mall today, to different types of recreation facilities, restaurants, cinemas would all be permitted in different locations on the site. Office.
James,
Yes.
Jim, I have a quick question. This is Mike Nishimura. Is there flexibility within each planning area? I mean, one thing that sticks out in my eyes there is that it doesn't make sense to have a senior community facing Sunrise right next door to a music venue. I mean, would there be that kind of flexibility within this plan, within the planning area?
Yeah, there is flexibility in terms of the overall uses. So the plan sets that development allowance, but for example, a senior housing facility would be one of the types of residential facilities that would be allowed. It wouldn't necessarily be the only one.
So it's not set in stone that the senior community needs to go facing Sunrise right next door to the music venue.
Yes,
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, please chime in if there are any other questions as we go through the presentation. Office uses, these could include professional office, creative office, amenity spaces that serve those offices, like food and beverage or conference facilities, as well as medical office, which is a growing need in the city. And finally, community and institutional uses that would be allowed in different locations on the site. This category of uses would include childcare centers, could include conference facilities, fitness or health facilities, potentially even hospital type facilities, libraries, museums, meeting facilities, or schools would all be allowed in this category. And again, that's not to say that that all of these things are proposed or that all of these things would occur, but these are the types of uses that would be allowed in the portions of the plan that are identified for community or institutional use. And finally, hotel. A few sites on the across the plan area are identified as appropriate for hotel uses, and these types of hotels could be business hotels, full service, or extended stay hotels. The mobility framework in this chapter identifies the types of street network and pedestrian circulation, bicycle circulation, transit facilities that would accommodate people across the site. One of the main features of the mobility network is the transit center, which would replace the existing transit center located across Greenback behind the shopping center there, moving it to a more central location and allowing for the majority of the site to be within a 5-minute walk of a transit stop for bus or future BRT transit. The site also features what we're calling the Green Loop, which is a multi-use bicycle and pedestrian pathway around the perimeter of the site that would be a recreational amenity for people living in the site and for the surrounding communities, and that could connect to the existing regional trail network, including at Arcade Creek Park Preserve. The plan identifies, the location of vehicular facilities. One new traffic signal is envisioned along Sunrise Boulevard. The existing, in general, the existing entryways are maintained, existing signals and right in, right out access for a network of vehicular roadways, and then driveways providing access to each of the sites, and locations for loading areas, passenger drop-off are all envisioned in locations to serve each of the development sites. The plan includes a robust open space network, and it's envisioned to include a variety of types of spaces. And we'll get into a little more detail on some of these as we look at the open space chapter, but the overall idea is to provide a variety of spaces for different types of open space uses and activities. And finally, the sustainability framework looks at how to make the plan, as environmentally friendly as possible, with identifying opportunities for bioswales and stormwater retention on site, permeable green space that would be greatly increased, as well as solar opportunity sites on some of the larger potential parking structures or larger buildings across the site area.
James, would you explain briefly what a bioswale is?
Yes, a bioswale is a landscaped area that's might be located along the side of a roadway or in a green space that's depressed. And the idea is that when stormwater comes, rather than running right off the roadway into the storm sewer and potentially overwhelming that network, some of that water could be diverted to a planted area that would have native vegetation, and that allows it to filter more slowly into the existing groundwater aquifer. It reduces the burden on the stormwater network and helps to provide groundwater resources that can support the landscaping on site.
Thank you.
Any other questions about the framework before we get into some of the details about the development standards?
Hey, Mr. Dunsmore, I have a question.
Yes.
Back at the mobility framework, I'm sure this was looked at, but is there any opportunity for a pedestrian and bicycle access from the existing south residential area? Because right now there's a huge residential area on the south side to the right, opposite of Greenback. Is there access to the project from this neighborhood?
There's not direct access. We did look at the potential of connecting along that southern boundary in a few locations, but due to the private property down there, there's not an easy way to do that. It's something that we can certainly pursue. It would require one of the property owners down there to grant an easement to do so. It's a conversation we can have, but the property doesn't have the rights to that at this point.
Got it. Thank you.
I have a question. This is Janelle Engel. I don't know if this is the right time or if this needs to be directed to Casey at a later time. In regards to I saw an affordable housing piece in there and transit. And so my question is, when we actually come to settle on something down the road, does the city work with transit, for one thing, to make certain that we have frequent enough stops? If we're going to be using any affordable housing component, in order to make it most successful for whichever developer comes in to do that, they need to apply for, bonds and credits and such. And so I would just like to know if we work with transit to make certain, if possible, we get enough stop times. And then if we also consider, before we totally decide on a plan, making it, bringing in some of those few components that are mandated as far as groceries, medical park, schools, pharmacies, those kind of things within a site. And then on affordable housing, my last question is, does the city just deem this like an affordable housing component? They don't decide senior or family, just affordable. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Why don't I start with the transit and we'll go for that. Oh, thanks, James. So we've been working closely with RT throughout the process. Sunrise Boulevard is one of the corridors in the region that are identified in the future to be pursued for bus rapid transit, which is more frequent buses and more convenient. So that's partially why the transit center is designed in that location. It makes transit operations more efficient and more effective for passengers riding that, and it becomes a junction for numerous lines. So that does help with things like what I think you're referring to, scoring for affordable housing projects.
Exactly.
They need those kind of things to score well. The project doesn't have an affordable housing requirement built into it. But by nature of having higher density housing, the state of California believes that results in more affordable housing, but there's no requirement for that to be deed restricted or anything along those lines at this point. I think that got all your questions. Did I miss anything?
I guess my last question is, when do we address the height?
We are going to talk about development
yeah.
standards here in a moment. So if there's something in particular, we can maybe chime in during that portion of it.
I'll hang tight. Thank you.
So this is Mike Nishimura. I just want to make sure, verify that our RENA requirements, we're not going to have to make up for RENA requirements elsewhere in the city and give some type of affordable housing with we're meeting that requirement.
Right. So the state of California and housing element world, it counts 20 units per acre for Citrus Heights is considered affordable. And the level of density on this proposal is higher than that. So in their eyes, any unit that is constructed on the site and consistent with the specific plan is considered affordable for RENA purposes. So there wouldn't be any need to rezone elsewhere in the city to accommodate, because we are accommodating about 150 units on the site of higher density housing, which is only a small portion of the allotment of housing identified for the site.
Okay, thank you. That helps. I do have another question on the pedestrian framework though, because seeing some and hearing some comments from the public, there's a little bit of a concern that it's all outdoors. There's no climate controlled walking area that they have right now within the mall. And to the older community, that seems to be a really important issue. Is there anywhere within this framework that there could be an indoor walking facility? I don't know.
And that would certainly be a unique land use. I'm not sure I've ever seen an air-conditioned walking path, but something that probably would be allowed. But I think more importantly and more aligned with what the plan envisions is this green network that's tree-lined streets that have buildings at the back of sidewalk that have awnings and arcades that create a natural shade. I know we do get warm here in the summertime, but you can also look at other developments in the region like Palladio or the fountains, and they're just as busy during the summer months as they are any other time. So I think it's a desirable feature to have these walkable streets and beat the heat in using the shade as opposed to using HVAC.
Okay, thank you.
I'd add to that response. In addition to the walking paths, that provide that type of recreational amenity, the site or the specific plan does include that land use for community types of uses, which could include indoor recreation facilities, community gyms, or facilities, could have an indoor walking track that would be permitted as part of the community or institutional use category. So that is something that could be developed in the plan as a community amenity. If there aren't any other questions about the overall framework, I'll keep going and delve into the development standards that get into a little bit more detail about the types of uses, the types of buildings that are allowed in each of the planning areas. So this table shows how development standards are treated across the site. Certain types of standards related to building design and quality, circulation, signage, parking are regulated site-wide, so that's consistent. Other types of standards, for instance, building character or the maximum development allowed is defined by each planning area. The types of building placement and orientation is taken a look at and governed at the sub area level. And then in terms of actual height, setbacks, and building use, that's established site by site. So each development site in the plan area has a specific height standard, has setbacks, and has allowed uses. So since there are 6 planning areas and multiple sub areas across the site, what we'd like to do is just show one as an example. And we do have all the information on each planning area. So if there are any questions about other planning areas, we could certainly delve into that. But to show in general how the standards would work and how they would be implemented, we have planning area 2 as an example. So in this chapter, for each planning area, there's a site area that's identified for that planning area. The net site area is the portion of that planning area minus the roadways and circulation spaces. Maximum development thresholds are established for each planning area, and that's established as a number of gross square feet. The effective FAR is put in there for reference, but the regulating mechanism is actually the amount of square footage, not the FAR. And then within each planning area, there are development allowances by use. So for example, planning area 2, in the center of the plan, the most dense and mixed use portion would allow up to 620 units of residential, up to 240 hotel rooms, up to 160,000 square feet of retail, up to 220,000 square feet of office, and up to 34,000 square feet of community or institutional uses, as well as up to 2,200 parking spaces. So that's this portion of the plan that's highlighted here along Main Street and the Sunrise Commons open space. Each planning area has several or sometimes multiple sub areas, and these are intended to regulate the different characters of each of these kind of sub neighborhoods. So sub area 2A is the Main Street. This is really envisioned as the commercial and retail spine, the focal point of the entire plan area. So some of the key elements that are here, of course, the Main Street itself, and the plan has standards for the type of development that could occur along Main Street, as well as you'll see in the next chapter, street standards for what the actual street public realm would be like. A food hall is envisioned as kind of a key anchor at the intersection of Main Street and the Sunrise Commons space. The plan includes pedestrian paseos that would go between buildings, and as you can see in some of the areas, could go through buildings with development above to allow pedestrian circulation at a kind of finer grain scale than the street network. Along Main Street, there would be mixed-use buildings, which could include either office or residential uses above. And a hotel is envisioned at the kind of key site where Main Street and the Sunrise Commons connect. That's really the 100% corner, the busiest, the kind of center point of the plan area, and that's the focal point for this sub area. Sub area 2B is the Sunrise Commons. This is the development around that central open space. That's really the central park of the plan area. So it includes that open space itself, restaurants and outdoor dining along the sides of that open space, with ground floor retail along the adjacent streets, upper floor residential, multifamily residential above, and then parking that would be screened from view by the development itself. So parking that would be wrapped with residential units. And then the final sub area of this planning area is the Sunrise Frontage along Sunrise Boulevard itself. This is where the transit center is intended to be located, and there would be a kind of a open space plaza terrace, Sunrise Terrace, that would be covered with some sort of iconic shade structure to allow events or activities to take place there, with stairways and ramps connecting from the transit center and Sunrise Boulevard to the rest of the site. There is about a 6 foot or so grade transition from the Sunrise Boulevard to the main part of the site. And then restaurants would be located adjacent to each of those spaces. So if you look at in the plan document itself, you'll see that actually for each development site, there are specific standards for building mass and building placement. What we've done here to simplify it for the presentation is just show you what is the typical for each of these sub areas. But if you want to dig into each parcel by parcel detail, you can see that in the plan itself. So in development area 2A, that's along Main Street itself. The typical number of floors that would be allowed would be a minimum of 3 floors along there and a maximum of 6. And the reason we're establishing both those standards is that we actually want to see enough development along Main Street that it feels like the center of the project. And at one location, development site 2-A6, that's where that hotel is envisioned. That site would be allowed up to 12 stories. There's standards for ground floor height, minimum of 15 feet, maximum of 20 feet. That's intended to ensure that these ground floors are viable for commercial uses. And building heights along the Main Street itself in the center of the plan, a maximum of 80 feet is typical. That single development site where the hotel is envisioned would allow up to 120 feet. But as you get down towards the periphery, towards Sunrise Boulevard, as you can see here, the maximum number of floors would just be 2, maximum height 40 feet. And that's typical across the plan. The greatest height, the greatest development intensity is envisioned in the center, and lesser levels of development, greater, more restrictive height limits as you approach the southern and eastern edges of the site adjacent to the residential. The plan establishes setbacks, how far buildings have to be from the internal streets along Main Street. It actually establishes both minimum and maximum setbacks, so a 0-foot minimum and a 5-foot maximum. That's intended to ensure that the street has a kind of a compact, more traditional Main Street feel, where buildings come up to the edge of the sidewalk. But in order to ensure that there's light and air and circulation, there is a step back that would occur for upper levels of the building. So for buildings over 60 feet in height along Main Street, there would be a minimum 5-foot step back above 20 feet. And we have a diagram to show what that would look like. But basically the buildings step back as they get higher to allow that light and air to still get down to the street. So those are the types of standards that are established for each of the planning areas across the site. This is just one example, but for each of the planning areas, there are standards for the uses, the heights and setbacks, and we can get into detail on any more of those if there are specific questions about any of the other development areas. Any questions about how the development standards work across the site before we look at some of the other standards that are in the plan? Sounds like there aren't. So I'll go ahead with the street design standards. So the plan identifies different street typologies across the site, from the Main Street to a parkway type streets, primary streets and secondary streets. And for each of these street typologies, the plan establishes standards for how that street would be designed. So for example, Main Street, you can see here, it's designed with an intended design speed of 25 miles per hour, an overall roadway width of 82 feet. But within that, the vehicular zone is constrained at just 26 to 42 feet, depending on whether or not there's on-street parking or not along there. So it's really a space that's designed to have wide sidewalks up to 22 feet wide in the Main Street to allow those businesses that are located along there, restaurants, to spill out in certain zones where that could be accommodated. You can see that in the plan diagrams here. This also, the sections also illustrate how that step back works. So you can see for a taller building, it steps back further from the street as it goes up in height. And the plan also establishes standards for the type of landscaping that would be required with minimum widths that are designed to accommodate larger trees and ensure that there's sufficient space for those types of plantings. And of course, we've also worked with the fire district to ensure that all the roadway widths are sufficient for their fire truck and aerial apparatus access, which is important given the heights that are envisioned for the plan.
May
I
I
have
ask a question before you leave there?
Yes.
We're going fast. I've looked at this before, but I just want to make sure. It looks to me as though most of the cars that are going to be driving within the center, it looks like you've got some, is everything just 2 lanes, maximum of 2 lanes within the perimeter of the entire center for vehicle traffic?
Typically, yes. Some of the entries are wider to allow for the multiple lanes coming in off of Sunrise or Greenback, as well as to allow for the queuing space for vehicles as they queue up and wait for those signals exiting the site. But in general, within the core of the plan, most of the streets are just 2 lanes, and we work with the traffic team to ensure that there's sufficient road network to accommodate that. So the plan has a whole network of streets, but we tried to keep them fairly tight in terms of their design so that they're safe to cross and you don't have to go across multiple lanes as a pedestrian when you're within the site.
With the idea that it's going to make people drive slowly, right?
Yes.
Like there's
Yeah.
not going to be the opportunity to fly through any of it. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just
Question.
go ahead.
Okay, say I were to open a restaurant, would I be able to have outdoor dining?
Yes.
Or does it have to be in certain areas? And then with everything that's going on now, I don't think it's gonna go away. What about delivery staging? Delivery service, Uber Eats, DoorDash? I mean, if the DoorDash drivers are gonna have to go park in the parking lot, will we have staging areas available for the various restaurants that are spread out through the project?
Go ahead, James, if you want.
Okay, yes, the overall circulation framework identifies service access. So for restaurants and stores, how are they getting the goods that they need? How is the trash being removed? In general, there's no service access provided along Main Street itself. All of the service access is provided from the back of the buildings, so that you don't have to have large trucks coming down the Main Street core. So areas for service access are identified. There are also areas identified on each block for Uber or Lyft pickup, for pedestrian pickup, as well as could be used for short-term parking for deliveries. So as you can see here along Main Street, in the image on the right, in certain areas the street widens out to accommodate parking spaces on either side that could be used for short-term parking, for drop-off or pickup. And I think there was a question about where would outdoor dining be allowed. It's allowed throughout the entire plan area, but there are spaces where it's accommodated. So as you can see in the plan exhibits here, where the street has just 2 lanes, where there's no on-street parking, the sidewalks wide enough that there are that what we're calling a flex zone where outdoor dining could occur. But in other locations, like the image on the right, where the parking lanes are, in order to maintain clear access along the sidewalk, there might not be outdoor dining allowed there. So it's built into the plan to have areas where that could be accommodated, where restaurants would be located.
So that would pertain also to retailers with curbside pickup?
Yes, Yeah, the parking spaces are provided on each block or cutouts for pickup, drop off types of uses.
Now, are the dining areas going to be centralized? Like I noticed at Santana Row, they kind of have a common area where somebody can order a drink at a brew pub, somebody can get a glass of wine at a wine shop, and they can walk around with it within the confined food area. They can't take drinks into the retail stores or anything like that. But do you think that the California Alcoholic Beverage Control would allow something like that down the road with this?
I could see something like that in portions of the plan. Generally, there has to be a contained area where alcohol is limited to for ABC's purposes. I think it's a little early to know for sure, but that's certainly something that we would encourage. I think it's a great idea and something that people enjoy. So I think that's a good idea to look forward as we get more into the details as projects come in.
But that's not a part of the vision that you're looking at right now.
It's a little bit too detailed until you know your mix of tenants and things along those lines, I would say.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question about the street. So many of these areas, many of these development-like areas, they have a lot of buildings, and I'm assuming they're gonna have a lot of traffic, especially with like the roads leading over to, you know, the residential areas, hotels. I mean, there's gonna be a lot of cars. So I'm just wondering, would there be an opportunity to expand the road to have a dedicated bike lane, similar to what Sacramento City is doing, where they're moving away from, you know, giving all the space to the vehicles and actually splitting up and giving more right away to bicycles, making them more safer, making them, you know, promotes, I guess, alternate roads of transportation or modes of transportation. So is there an opportunity to expand these roadways or make them a little wider so we could have a dedicated bike lane on each side?
We took that under consideration as we were developing street standards, and the challenge with bike lanes is it widens the overall roadway, which helps inhibit speeding through areas, because people will still go a little bit faster because the road's a little bit wider. So our thought process was to make the street slower, and you could have mixed traffic through there, as well as really leveraging the green loop that kind of connects to most of the site. I think once you get internal to the site more, it's going to be a little bit more congested, a little bit slower, and more comfortable for folks to walk or bike, as well as there's, you know, a number of paseos that get from point A to point B. So I think it's a little bit different environment than down in Sacramento. You know, sometimes you have those one-way streets and people are going fast, and they're a little bit wider. So I think we're trying to create a little bit slower area that's more conducive to walking and biking, or mixing if appropriate.
Got it. Plus another question. So on the Parkway B, all the way to the south, next to the residential area. So right now there's a wooden fence along the south line of the property. So with the additional traffic, because right now, I mean, the Macy's Road, I mean, I don't know how often it's used or how much traffic there is, but I'm assuming there's gonna be a little more noise there. So is there a plan for a different fence, or a taller fence, or a different kind of fence, to kind of have a barrier for the noise control for the road system?
Yeah, the development standards include a masonry wall along that frontage to help mitigate the noise. In addition, the setback, right now the roads are really, really close to those backyards, and the setback, I don't remember off the top of my head, but we did have a minimum setback that did really increase that area for plantings and have a little bit more space than what's there today. So, and then the traffic right now, it's kind of people speed through there. And so the design is to have a little bit slower, because it's only going to be one lane in each direction instead of several. So
Nice. Will there be any speed bumps on the roads?
we have discussed the raised pedestrian crosswalks as an option. Traffic calming is something that we'll look in more detail as the detailed development plans come in. I see Leslie on here. She will make sure that after dealing with all the speeding issues she deals with, that we don't create a similar issue here. So
Cool. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I would add that the plan is really, and the street framework is designed to kind of naturally slow people. So a few features that I point out here. One thing is that you'll notice none of the streets go straight through the site. If you enter the site, on primary street A, you want to get over to, the east side, you have to kind of do a jog. So that slows people down. At several of the key intersections within the plan, there are traffic circles, similar in scale to the one near City Hall, so that people can't drive straight through. They have to slow down and drive around them. So those are some of the features that would naturally help to slow down traffic moving through the site. And in terms of bicycle facilities along both Sunrise and Greenback, the portions of the green loop there would be provided as a multi-use path. So it would be separated from the traffic by a landscaped area. Then there'd be the multi-use path. So it's really a higher quality of experience for pedestrians or bicyclists than just a bike lane on the street where traffic's going right next to you. And that multi-use path continues throughout the site along both of the parkways, but within the smaller streets of the site, we're thinking that traffic will be moving slowly enough that it will feel safe for bicyclists to go along those streets or along the pedestrian paseos or other open spaces. So that was Main Street. This is just a look at one of the other types of streets. So this is more typical. This is the primary street. Main Street is obviously the focus of the plan, but along other types of primary streets, still having more generous sidewalks, but really the right scale. So Main Street has the widest sidewalks, but as you get to other areas, we have provided wider sidewalks, but we don't want them so wide that we're going to create kind of unused space. And for each of the street typologies within the plan, you can see the proposed design in the plan document. Any other questions about the street standards chapter before we look at open space? All right. So there are a whole range of open space typologies envisioned throughout the site. You can see we've identified 12 different typologies on the plan here. And each of these typologies is addressed in the open space chapter of the plan with details about the types of amenities that could be found there, precedent images to show what it's envisioned to look like, and in some cases, standards for how large it should be or key dimensions for some of the facilities there. We won't go through each of these typologies on the presentation tonight, but to give you an example of how that works, we'll show a few of the key ones. So, of course, Sunrise Commons at the center of the site is one of the main open spaces. So this is an excerpt of some of the details that's provided in the open space chapter for this open space. So there is a minimum size established, 80,000 square feet for this open space. Precedent images that show the types of uses that could occur here, and some call outs on the plan. I'll note there's an idea for interactive water feature, something that could be used as a play fountain, but also that could be turned off and be used as a performance space or for events. There'd be a mix of hardscape paths as well as an event lawn and spaces for outdoor dining along both sides. So not only along the streets of the plan, but along some of the primary open spaces like Sunrise Commons, there's the idea for outdoor dining. And one thing is this is really envisioned as an event space. So things that happen, today just in the parking lot, like the farmer's market or brews in the burbs, they could happen in the future in Sunrise Commons, and this could be utilized for concerts, like we know used to happen in the temporary stadium or other types of uses throughout the year.
James, may I ask a question?
Yes.
I don't have in my head what 80,000 square foot looks like. Is there something local that you can give us an idea of what that size might encompass? Like,
So that's about 2 acres. I'm trying to think.
so looking at the two images that you have on the left, those are both much smaller than 80,000 square feet, correct?
I think the image, the lower image that shows kind of a concert event space
Mhm.
is kind of comparable. So, you know,
Okay. I just don't have an idea of that.
Commissioner Engel,
Janelle,
a,
which,
go ahead.
well, to put it in perspective for you, the Elephant Bar building itself is about a little less than 10,000 square feet. So if you were to take 8 of those buildings and line them up side by side, 2x4 or whatever, that's about the size of what 80,000 square feet would be. You see what I'm saying? The Elephant Bar building is just shy of 10,000 square
10.
feet.
Okay.
So you would have 8 of those buildings lined up, either 2x4 or whatever.
Isn't the height, this is Commissioner Van Duker, the height of the commons area on the screen right now is about half the distance from Sunrise to the existing building, right?
That would help. Is that
Yeah, I think that's probably a close approximation.
yeah, for a reference point, 80,000 square feet is like the size of a professional soccer field. The high school is maybe more around 60,000. So that center green space is probably, think about it as the size of your typical local soccer field with space around it. So, it could be events that could accommodate, maybe 200 to 300 people at most for a concert or event like that.
okay? So maybe even like Cal Expo soccer field would be comparable. I mean, a professional soccer field size.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, that is very helpful. I appreciate it.
One of the other key open spaces on the site is what we're calling the community green, which would be located in the southeast corner of the site. And this is really envisioned as a little bit quieter of a park space that would have not so much large events, but would really be used day to day by people on site and in the adjacent community and adjacent apartment buildings, with a play space for kids potentially. Could have some type of shade structure for smaller events, for family picnics or something like that, with an open lawn, shade trees. And this area could additionally potentially have some type of small building for recreational amenities or that could be used for smaller scale community events. And this is about 70,000 square feet is the minimum size envisioned for this area.
That would help for the affordable housing component too, if you put some structure there as a park.
Yeah. And finally, the green loop multi-use path is one of the key open space elements linking all of the spaces around the site. It would have a minimum width of 14 feet, so that would be comfortable for two-way bicycle traffic with people running or jogging or walking adjacent to that. Could be a fully paved path or paved path for bicyclists with a jogging trail adjacent to it, and that would extend all the way around the site along Sunrise and Greenback Lane, as well as along that parkway. So people coming through from the neighborhood connecting to the site, or from here, going on to some of the nearby parks and trails, could use this as an amenity, or just within the site to go around this loop. And then in addition to these, there's a whole range of smaller scale open spaces across the site for, intended to serve the different types of residential communities or the entertainment areas that are envisioned on the site. And those are all detailed in the plan document itself. Any other questions about the types of open space spaces that are envisioned across the site?
I don't, this is Commissioner Vice Chair Flowers. I don't have a specific question about that, but I'm wondering in your presentation if you do go into more illustration about the parking and whether there'll be any need or that you guys have foreseen any need for a parking structure of sorts. I'm seeing in the central park there, it looks to me like the two adjacent buildings are housing or mixed use residential. And I see parking in the middle of that. I believe that's what you illustrated. But my thought is with as much open space and as much shopping and as much, inviting areas that people will drive there in a car and want a great place to park. And if we have a big concert that's not necessarily limiting how many people can come, I'm wondering if parking will be some sort of concern.
We'll touch on parking a little bit more in detail, but
Great, thank you.
at build out and as envisioned by this is just about almost the same amount of parking spaces provided that is there today. Just there'll be structured parking and more efficient use of parking than there is today, obviously, and more intensity.
Thank you.
Yeah, in the illustrative plan that you can see here, there are parking structures shown. Both there would be parking structures that would be incorporated in the residential building, so that's parking, primarily for the residents, and then some standalone parking structures potentially to serve either the retail uses or some of these employment office uses. So that there are a range of parking structures across the site, and we'll talk about it when we get into the environmental analysis. One thing I'd mention is that the site really tries to use a shared parking strategy that allows people to park once and do multiple types of activities. So if you come here to shop and then go to a movie or something, you don't have to drive and park in each individual location. And the mixed use strategy of having office and retail or office and event space, those types of uses may occur at different times. So during the day, those surface parking lots might be used by the offices, but if there's a concert on Saturday evening, that office parking could be used for people coming for that event.
Can I ask a question?
Go
Sorry.
Go ahead.
So as far as the parking goes, is it going to be similar to the Palladio? There's no like metered parking or anything, right?
Right now, the streets are proposed to be privately owned, so they would all be, there would be no meters, at least as part of a city function. I think the market would dictate that, but I believe there would probably not be a need for metered parking.
Question about open spaces and common spaces, not specific to this project, but in any type of project similar to this, who pays for the open spaces, for the common spaces? How does it, yeah.
It depends if it's a publicly owned open space or privately owned open space. There's the potential for both here. It's not necessarily spelled out one way or another, but in general, in the most of these developments that are in the region, like Palladio or Fountains, the open space that's there is maintained and owned by the private property owner.
So the incentive for the property owner to maintain and upkeep the open space is to attract possible, patrons, et cetera. Thus, they would have to upkeep it versus not upkeeping and no visitors type of thing, right? Yeah,
that's one way to do it. Or we also have part of the development agreement process. We can specify maintenance standards and so forth. So that's kind of the next step after the specific plans approved. Development agreements would come next, and that gets really into the weeds where you start talking about who maintains what and who's responsible for what and when that things are going to be built and so forth. So there's a lot more detail to come in the future on that kind of stuff.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. We'll keep moving on and touch briefly on infrastructure and then a little bit about how the plan will be implemented. Just briefly, it's a legal requirement for specific plans in California that you identify, all of the utilities that are required to serve the development that would be enabled by the plan. So as part of this process, we've worked with our city engineer and with our civil engineers on the project to reach out to all of the utility providers that would be serving this site, ensure that there would be adequate supply of water, sewer infrastructure, electricity, et cetera, for the site. And as part of that, our civil engineer on the team has done demand calculations to identify what the needs would be and ensure that that could be provided. And then this diagram shows how the plan, identifies the utility infrastructure across the site for everything from water, sewer, storm drain, electrical, gas infrastructure, and the points of connection to the existing network. Pretty brief on utilities, but any questions about that or infrastructure before we?
Yeah, I do. This is Mike Nishimura, because it looks as if it's all one big project. It's not by planning area. I mean, it all has to be tied in together, correct? But you're going to be doing it in phases.
There's multiple ways that infrastructure can be done. If it's built in phases, as part of the development agreement, we could specify some of the details that are required for phasing to make sure that, for example, if you're on the downstream side, you need to put a little bit bigger stormwater pipe to make sure that you can accommodate the rest of the site. So we do have that ability, and we'll dive into those level of details as part of the development agreement.
Do you have the existing utilities anywhere?
We do, yes. We have
that we could view.
I don't know if we have that as part of this presentation, but it's part of the specific plan.
Because like my primary concern is water and sanitary sewer. I mean, would we be putting in new infrastructure or would we be tying into the existing infrastructure? Because it's like the water district is in the process of replacing water. Well, their 2030 project is replacing water mains. I mean, some of the water lines on the existing mall are what, 60 years old now?
Mm-hmm.
So, would they be tying into existing lines or are they going to completely put in new water lines? And same thing with sewer.
They've figured all this out. It's unimportant right now for the presentation of the plan to know specifically how they're going to tie the sewer
in. I think maybe I can answer the question about it. The existing utilities infrastructure diagram isn't in the presentation. I apologize, but it is in the plan document, so you can see it there. In general, most of the existing utility infrastructure within the mall property boundaries would be replaced because it is old or it's not in the right location for where the new development would be. All of that in general is privately owned by the mall. It was put in by the original mall developer and it's been maintained by the mall owners over the years. So this diagram shows how that would be laid out on the private property of the mall, and then the existing points of connection would be used. So this would tie into the existing public water network or public sewer network at the existing locations along Greenback and Sunrise. And as part of the requirements of the specific plan, the civil engineers coordinated with the different utility providers to ensure that, for example, the sewer main along Sunrise Boulevard is adequate in size to capture all of the sewer that would be coming off of the site with the increased number of residents that would be here. So, so for more detail, I'd refer you to the plan document itself.
All right, thank you.
Were there any studies done on cellular utilities or cellular coverage here? Or is that typically something that antennas will be added as the needs or the need arises? How does that typically work?
Yeah, that's typically something that's not covered under the specific plan's purview.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions about infrastructure utilities, we'll go on to the last section of the plan, which is about implementation and administration of the plan itself. So this is, I apologize, a little bit complicated, but this is a diagram of the development review process that would occur after the plan is adopted. If it's adopted by the city council, what would happen if one of the mall property owners wanted to propose a project? What's the review process for that? So the first step, as Casey's mentioned, is there needs to be a development agreement in place. So the plan requires that there's a development agreement in place for each planning area where the project would be proposed before any development could occur in that planning area. And the reason for that is to address things like, who is paying for what portion of the infrastructure, or if there's a need for a utility line that goes across multiple parcels or multiple planning areas, ensuring that infrastructure is in place. So the first step is there a development agreement in place? If not, a development agreement needs to be prepared. And if it is, then the next step in reviewing the project is looking at the development allowance. So the question is, would the proposed project cause the total development or development by use to exceed what's allowed in the plan? If not, you can move on. If it does, any changes to the maximum development allowance or major changes would require a specific plan amendment, but minor changes, and we'll talk about what those are on the next slide, could be approved either by the community development director or a planning commission. So once you've established that there is a development agreement, that the total square footage or total number of units is underneath the cap, the question that the planning staff will look at is, are the allowed uses permitted for the development site where the project's located? If not, a specific plan amendment is required. Or if yes, you can go on. In some cases, there are additional requirements for certain types of uses that require a use permit or minor use permit. Typically, those are related to alcohol sales. So once you've established that the use is allowed, then the development standards are looked at, and the question is, does the project conform to the development standards? Is it underneath the height cap? Are the setbacks correct? Does it meet the overall intent of those standards? If there are major changes, that would require an amendment, but minor changes can be approved on a project by project basis. And finally, for certain projects, design review may be required, and that's just to look at, does the project align with the overall vision, intent, character of the specific plan and the planning area where the project is located. So those are the questions. Those are kind of the steps of a review process for any individual project once the plan is adopted. Then, because we know we need to accommodate flexibility and allow for changes over time, there is a process for minor changes to be approved without the need for a specific plan amendment. So minor changes to the allowance by use up to 10%, minor changes to the amount of open space, not more than 20%, minor changes to the minimum or maximum height, building design, any of those things can be considered. And as you can see here, some of the more significant changes, like a change to the allowance by use or change to the open space requirement, would require approval by the planning commission, and certain findings to be met, that there is either a technical infeasibility or that the proposed change complies with the overall intent. And then as you go down the list here, some of the things are really more technical. For instance, minor changes to the street design or utility line alignments could be approved at the staff level, either by the city engineer or community development director. So The plan has identified a sewer line in one location, but for technical reasons, it needs to be located slightly differently. That can be approved by the city engineer without the need for a specific plan amendment. And of course, any of the changes that are approved at the staff level can be appealed to the planning commission, and that decisions by the planning commission are ultimately subject to the city council for review and approval. Then the project phasing, this is envisioned as a 20-year vision. Not necessarily it will take 20 years to build everything, but that when we do a plan like this, it takes a lot of time. We want to make sure that we've thought about not what's just going to happen, in the short term, but what's going to happen long term. So the plan doesn't specify what phase has to occur first. It doesn't. There is flexibility there, but this is what we anticipate to be likely. Phase one, things in the first kind of up to 5 years are likely to be portions of the site that are what we're calling ready to go today. So that's the Sears parcel, because obviously Sears is not operating today. That site could be developed more easily than some of the portions of the mall that have existing tenants, or some of the outer portions of the site that are used for parking. The mall has more parking than it needs today, so some of that could be redeveloped without the need to replace parking initially. Things, in the more 5 to 10 year range is when things like the employment anchor, some of the additional housing are envisioned, just because those take longer, a little longer lead time, and in some cases those are located where existing tenants may be. The actual, development of the mall, redevelopment of the mall into mixed-use Main Street is probably more in the third phase, and then ultimately the existing Macy's, JCPenney anchors. Of course, under this plan, they have the right to continue to operate, so they could remain indefinitely, or if those stores were to close, or the developers wanted to reuse those sites, those could be redeveloped as well. So that's one example of how the phasing could occur, but this is one area where there is a lot of flexibility in what might happen, and it's going to be subject to the market conditions, to the different owners' decision making and strategies for that. And then kind of final takeaways to sum it up, this is kind of why we think this specific plan is the right plan for this site and right plan right now. First and foremost, jobs. I mean, that was one of the initial drivers for the city to take an interest in this project. Sunrise Mall is the major economic engine for the city in terms of jobs and tax revenue, and this plan provides a transition away from the existing retail to something that's going to be viable longer term. Of course, a mix of housing that's important to help, of course, the city meet its RENA numbers, things more technical like that, but also to really provide the type of vibrancy for what we want to see happen here. We say it takes villagers to make a village. So if we want to have a mixed-use Main Street, we want to have shops and retail and open space, we need people to live here to come and use it. This plan really positions the city for the future. I think the city and the city council deserve a lot of credit for taking this challenge on. It's not unique to Citrus Heights. All over the country, malls are struggling, closing, losing stores, and can become a real blight in communities where the city didn't prepare for that. So thinking about the future is really wise, and I think the city is to be commended for taking on this challenge head on. The plan, delivers a robust network of amenities, open spaces, as well as lifestyle amenities, places to eat and dine and exercise. Multiple ways to get around with the transit network, bicycle and pedestrian network, and the street network. And finally, that this really has been a product of the people. We've had a tremendous participation from people in the community, a lot of outreach, a lot of engagement, and hopefully, you can't always please everyone with everything. But hopefully, everyone who's been involved in this process can look at the overall result and see see some pieces that reflect what they want to see happen for their city. So next steps, there'll be, I believe, a planning commission meeting to be scheduled where you will make a recommendation. And the idea is that the city council will have the opportunity to review the plan and hopefully adopt it by the end of this year. So that concludes my presentation on the plan overall. Any questions on anything that we didn't cover or that we didn't already address?
Yeah, and I'd also say, in addition to questions, if there's comments that you'd like to make, there's things about the plan you don't like or you would like to see different, now's the time we'd like to hear that, to make sure when we come back to you, we iron out any issues there could be. So we're here to listen and answer questions as needed.
This is Tom. I want to echo Commissioner Nishimura's concern, and I think we need to keep it in the back of our mind. I would suspect that maybe with the amount of residential involved, maybe there will be some type of a gym, maybe a multi-level gym, whatever else, that incorporates a walking track, because I know that's an issue for seniors, having a conditioned, covered space. I think we need to keep in mind down the road that green spaces don't make money for anybody. And so, but they are a community and community benefit. And so we have to guard them very carefully and not have them basically whittled away by development projects. So we need to, I think, keep that in mind. I think that'll keep community support for the project. Those are two thoughts that sort of pop in my mind.
Yeah, I just wanted to add I want to make sure that the project isn't held up by the construction operation reciprocal easement agreement, that no one property owner can hold this whole project up down the road, which has happened in the past.
So the Korea or REA is a private agreement between the private property owners that ensures that the property is maintained and adequate parking is provided. That's completely outside the city's purview or the specific plan. Our focus has been in doing this is couple things. Number one is making the site, unlocking the site, increasing the development capacity of the site, making it more attractive to developers. At the same time, my colleague Megan Huber, who's on as well, is actively in conversations with the development community about the site and its constraints and unique features of it. And every one of the developers we're talking to have indicated that the REA is not the obstacle, and the best approach for the city to do is to go ahead and approve a specific plan that unlocks the site and makes eliminates the obstacles that developers would normally have to go through, such as getting planning commission approval and getting community buy-in and the sequel side of things. So hopefully that answers your question.
All right, thank you.
Commissioners, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I guess I would like to take a break. I think we should get back together at
We actually need to open the public comment, please.
my apologies.
That's okay.
I'd like to open the public comment.
If there's anyone in the audience watching, you can raise your hand virtually or email into planning@centralized.net, which I do not have a raised hand or an email into the box at this point, but if you'd like, we can do it a few seconds.
I don't see anything either. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
I'd like to close the public comment. Since we're at about 7:35, why don't we reconvene, take a 5-minute break and reconvene at 7:40.
Thank you. Just a reminder, please stay connected to Zoom and just mute and turn off your camera.
5 minutes goes fast.
It does.
Chair, would you like Stacy to call the next item?
Yes, please.
Next item, public hearing, Sunrise Tomorrow Draft Environmental Impact Report, DEIR at 6041 Sunrise Boulevard. The draft environmental impact report examines the potentially significant effects on the environment resulting from the proposed Sunrise Tomorrow specific plan, including a proposed general plan amendment and rezone from shopping center to special planning area as described in the DEIR. Project planner Casey Kempenar.
Sorry about that. Can everyone see my screen with the Sunrise Tomorrow logo on? Okay. So Stacy mentioned we are going to cover the Drafty Ir tonight. Steve McMurtry with De Novo Planning is here. He was the lead consultant on EIR, so he'll be here for questions and run through an overview of the Drafty Ir. We also have John Gard from Fair & Pierce, who's on the traffic side of things, to answer any questions along those lines. So tonight, the main purpose of this is to give an overview and then receive public comment for those that wanted to provide comments vocally as opposed to emailing them in. This is their opportunity to do that. The response to comments will all be included in the final EIR. So there probably won't be any really substantive answers that get into a lot of detail today. For a lot of the EIR topics, there's a lot of nuance and detail to that. So that will all be entered into the final EIR, which will come back to the Planning Commission when you make your recommendation. So an outline of this part of the meeting, just a quick overview of EIR 101, project summary, which we'll kind of breeze over because you guys just got a really in-depth summary, an overview of the CEQA process, and then EIR conclusions, which includes traffic. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. My name is Steve McMurtry. I'm a principal planner with De Novo Planning Group. We were part of the Gensler team that was involved or hired to prepare the CEQA compliance document for this project. And so I have a few slides I wanted to take you through, starting with sort of what is an EIR, sort of the basics, and then we'll take you through a slide that talks about some of the entitlement requests that are being processed as part of the project description within the EIR. I'll spin a couple of slides to take you through the process, starting from the very beginning when we released an NOP up until today, which is sort of the last couple of days of the 45-day public review period for the draft EIR. And then we'll talk about the following steps leading towards the Planning Commission and City Council hearings where consideration of the EIR and project entitlements would occur. Once I do that, I wanted to spend a little time on some of the EIR conclusions and really zeroing in on those conclusions that were deemed to be significant and unavoidable. I wanted to talk a little bit about what that means, how it's relevant to the project, and how we sort of came to that conclusion. And then I was going to wrap it up with just really a summary of some of the mitigation measures that are incorporated into the EIR. And it's really intended to be a summary, just a bulleted list to give you kind of a snapshot of the ideas of mitigation that were incorporated. The full sort of detailed language of each mitigation measure is within the executive summary of the draft EIR. And so I won't go through it in that great a detail. So starting here with EIR 101, what is an EIR? Really at its core, it's a public disclosure document. It's not a document that's trying to get a project approved. It's not sort of for or against the project. It's a neutral document. And really what it's intended to do is take the environmental analysis from a variety of experts, from traffic engineers to noise engineers, air quality specialists, all these technical studies, and then it brings it into one singular document and sort of synthesizes that into individual chapters that really provide a setting and an environmental analysis and conclusion. And then ultimately what we want to do is release that to the public, disclose what the environmental consequences of a project are if you were to approve it and it were to be developed, and then get that feedback from the public. So an EIR is intended to disclose environmental impacts. And then also there's really three categories, or I guess 4 categories of environmental conclusions that are drawn and ultimately disclosed within an environmental impact report. It starts with a no impact. In certain cases, there's around 20 environmental topics analyzed in an EIR. And for some of them, we'll conclude that there is no environmental impact. In others, there's an impact, but it's really an insignificant impact. In other cases, we find that there is a potentially significant impact. And when that happens, what we try to do is develop alternatives or mitigation measures that would reduce that impact to an insignificant level. And it's really to the extent feasible. Sometimes there really is no feasible mitigation measure. And under that situation, if there's no feasible mitigation measure, or there's some mitigation measures, but they don't really reduce the impact to below a threshold, then we disclose that there is a significant and unavoidable impact. It's not uncommon. It's actually anytime that a significant unavoidable impact is known, you do have to prepare an EIR. So essentially in every EIR, there is at least one significant unavoidable impact. So that's really the bulk of an environmental impact report. I wanted to talk real quickly about traffic level of service. For anybody that's reviewed an EIR in the past, you're familiar with level of service, which is how traffic impacts were analyzed in the past. And what it is really a measurement of congestion, looking at delay at intersections and congestion that's created, that sort of comparing the new traffic that would be added to sort of the existing traffic on the roadways, and disclosing that and trying to come up with improvements. That's the way traffic analysis was done in the past. But as of July of last year, the California Senate passed a bill that really changed that. And so the new bill requires us to look at traffic from a vehicle miles traveled perspective. So what are sort of the trip lengths, and when you add this new project, where are the people coming from? Where are they going? There's residents, there's people visiting, there's people that work there. And what are the total vehicle miles traveled associated with all those activities? And so we look at that relative to a threshold. What we're not allowed to do anymore is make an impact conclusion in CEQA based on level of service or based on congestion. Level of service is still an important topic. It's still used as part of sort of the civil engineering and understanding, how to design roadways and intersections and make improvements where necessary. But it is not the basis of an environmental impact report conclusion. So we do include level of service analysis for various things, but again, it is not part of the conclusion. So when an EIR is sent out for public review, after all the experts have had their say and provided their conclusions, we provide it to the public, to public agencies, citizens, anybody that's interested in the project. And ultimately, we receive some feedback in the form of comments. All of those comments then are really broken down. They're usually provided in a comment letter. There will be a series of 4 or 5, upwards of 10, 15 individual comments within that letter. And we break down each one of those comments and we provide a very detailed response. In some cases, we're informing them or providing them some page in the EIR where we addressed their comment already. In some cases, they've informed us of something, an error, and we make a correction. Sometimes we need to amplify the analysis based on the questions or the comments that they have. And we do that in the form of an errata. So an errata is going to be additional text within the Drafty Ir. It's typically presented in a track change form. So it's going to have strike through for anything that's being deleted from the text and underline for anything that's being added to the text. And again, the response to comments, the comments themselves, and the errata collectively make up the final EIR. And so ultimately the final EIR with the Drafty Ir are then presented to the Planning Commission for their consideration, as well as the City Council for their consideration. Next slide, please. So there are essentially 4 entitlements here. The first step in any project, before you can even consider project approval or any entitlement approval, is you have to have a certified EIR. So that's the first step in the process. And this will be taken to you here in the coming months. What we would be asking you to do is consider the information that's provided within the draft environmental impact report, and also the process, starting with the NOP and the public engagement to solicit feedback to help deliver the scope that was needed for the draft EIR, and then how we responded to the final EIR. All of that information and the process ultimately leads you to a conclusion of whether or not you believe that it's an adequate EIR, that we've met the standard of the law, that we've done everything that we can, and we have accurate information within the EIR. And if you deem that that the EIR is adequate, then you move forward with the certification of the EIR. At that point, then you consider the project entitlements, adoption of the specific plan, amendment of the general plan. I think it was mentioned earlier, the amendment includes a general plan commercial land use change to a new land use designation of marketplace mixed use. And there's some updated policies that are required to be able to implement the specific plan. There's also a rezone associated with the project, and that zone changes from shopping center to a special planning area. Next slide, please. So the CEQA process really begins at the very beginning of the project. As you start to develop the design and the visioning, you go out to the public with a notice of preparation. And what you're letting the public know is that, hey, we have this project, we're going to prepare an EIR. This is the details of the project, and this is what we believe the scope of the analysis should be. And the reason we do that is we want to get feedback from citizens, from public agencies, neighboring communities, on whether or not we're on the right track. If there's maybe another environmental topic that we didn't consider, it's pointed out and we add that to the scope. So we went through this process August 7th, 2020 through September 8th, 2020. It's a 30-day public review period. And during that period, we also held a public scoping meeting where there's an opportunity for the public to provide verbal comment. And so comments come in, and that sort of guides the scoping of the EIR, the topics that are analyzed. And then ultimately that leads us to diving into the preparation of the draft EIR. And again, as I mentioned, there's a lot of different technical experts that provide their own technical studies for whatever environmental topic is their expertise, traffic, engineer, air quality, et cetera. And so for each of the mandatory environmental topics under the statutes, under the CEQA statutes, we have a chapter where we analyze that environmental topic. And ultimately, if we identify that there is a potentially significant impact or there's some way to reduce an impact, we identify a mitigation measure. And in some cases, we identify an alternative or a change to the project that could reduce the environmental impact to a less than significant level. So the draft EIR was completed and put out for public review on July 20th, 2021. And the 45-day public review period concludes on September 2nd, 2021. Next slide, please. So following the draft EIR public review period, as I mentioned, we'll jump into preparation of the final EIR. And this is it's not as substantial of a document as the draft EIR. It really focuses just on the comment letters, any email comments, any verbal comments that are provided in hearings. It breaks down each one of those and provides a very detailed response. And then ultimately, any changes will be provided in an errata. And so again, the Drafty Ir and the Final Eir combined are the EIR that is presented at the public hearings for ultimately certification to allow consideration of any of the project approval. So that last step would be the public hearings. And at the public hearing, there would be another opportunity for any public comment. There would be the EIR certification and the project approvals. Next slide. So now we wanted to jump into some of the conclusions within the EIR. And I'm really going to zero in on two topics, and that being the two topics that were identified as significant and unavoidable impacts, air quality and greenhouse gas emissions. And I have a slide on each one of those. So we'll kind of zero in on those. All of the other environmental topics that are presented within the EIR and analyzed within the EIR were deemed to be less than significant or less than significant with mitigation measure implemented as part of the project. Next slide. So air quality is the first significant and unavoidable impact conclusion. There was really two different categories under air quality analysis. There's the construction of a project and all the emissions that are associated with that. One thing to think of is construction starts and then it ends. And once it ends, it's over. So it's really a one-time release of emissions associated with any tractors or anything that's emitting criteria pollutants or greenhouse gases. And so there's a variety of mitigation measures that we included within the EIR. And these measures would ensure that the project-related construction emissions would be below the air quality management district's threshold. So construction was reduced to an insignificant level. When we go to operational emissions, and this is where once construction concludes, the project picks up and it starts to have all the activities associated with the buildings and the traffic and everything. What we found is that reactive organic gases and nitrogen dioxide would exceed the air district's established thresholds. There is a mitigation measure that we incorporated into the EIR that would require a 15% reduction in operational mobile source emissions for reactive organic gases and nitrogen dioxide. But even with that 15% reduction, we found that the total emissions, operational emissions, would still exceed the air district's thresholds for these two criteria pollutants. And as a result, we had to conclude that there would be a significant and unavoidable impact associated with ROx, reactive organic gases, and nitrogen dioxide emissions. Next slide, please. So the next topic that was determined to be significant and unavoidable was greenhouse gases and climate change. And so annual construction emissions of greenhouse gases associated with the project were calculated to have 1,520 metric tons of CO2 carbon dioxide equivalent in a single year. And so the year was 2027. The model year was 2027. In the operational scenario at build out, we found that there would be 11,212 metric tons of CO2 equivalent per year. And so what we did was we went through a whole host of mitigation measures that are recommended by the Air District. There's a variety of design measures that can be employed. But because of the nature of the project, it's not a small subdivision tract or a small project. It's really a large planning area. And it's not uncommon when you have a large planning area that you end up with a significant unavoidable impact, because a lot of the thresholds are designed for sort of individual projects, not a project on this scale. So it's not it's not uncommon to have a significant unavoidable impact for both air quality and greenhouse gas emissions on a large specific plan of this nature. But what we found is that even with the feasible mitigation measures deployed for this project, that there wouldn't be a full offset that would allow us to reduce the project to an insignificant level. Next slide, please. So I wanted to go just through, I have two slides here with just a summary, bulleted summary of some of the mitigation measures. I won't read through all of them. There is very detailed language within the executive summary again, that lays out, from anything from air quality to stormwater pollution prevention, very detailed language within those. I just wanted to give you sort of a brief overview of the types of mitigations and what they're intended to affect in terms of reducing environmental impacts. So we did include rules and regulations that are sort of already mandated, but we wanted to incorporate them within the EIR and incorporate them ultimately into the mitigation monitoring and reporting program. There are design features in the project that reduce criteria pollutants. We do have measures to do training for any construction workers in the event that they come across, if they're digging, if they come across cultural resources that could be found that are unknown. So a variety of things that the construction workers should be educated on to help prevent any environmental impacts. There are measures for best management practices relative to water quality, stormwater pollution prevention plans, avoiding erosion, a variety of measures that are really requirements and best management practices, but again, they're incorporated into the environmental impact report. There is a requirement for geotechnical investigations to be done really on a site level. So preliminary geotechnical investigations is going to look sort of generally over the site, what the soils are. But then when you go to develop an individual site and you need to have exact compaction based on the exact soils that are there, we have a requirement to do that design level geotechnical investigation. Next slide, please. So again, we have some stormwater control measures. There are measures to offset GHG emission. For instance, natural gas infrastructure. There is a requirement for hazardous materials surveys. And also during construction, there are certain requirements for the contractor to have plans to manage hazardous materials and any hazards that could that need to be associated with the construction to make sure that they're controlled and they don't spill and cause any kind of pollution on the site. Also, with the construction activities, there is a requirement that they manage traffic and that they manage noise. So we don't want an environment where construction activities are occurring at midnight in the most noise sensitive times. They should be operating during normal business hours, which is the hours generally where people are not sleeping and not considered the most noise sensitive time. And obviously construction traffic management, it's important to have places for staging equipment, for deliveries, for construction personnel to come and go. So there is a requirement for that to be incorporated into the project. And then also there's a variety of transportation and transit related transportation improvements that are incorporated into the project. And on the following slides, we do have our traffic engineer, John Gard from Peer and Peers. And he was going to take over from here and sort of take you through some of those measures and talk about traffic mitigation. So John?
Great. Thanks a lot, Steve. Good evening, Chair and members of the Commission. Again, I'm John Gard. I'm with Fair and Peers out of the Roseville office, and I'm a principal at the firm and a professional traffic engineer. And Casey, if I do get dropped from this call, which has happened once before, just now or 30 minutes ago, I'll jump right back on in about 30 seconds, okay? Just in case that does happen. So Steve did a very nice job of summarizing how Senate Bill 743 has majorly influenced how projects like this are now analyzed under CEQA. So I'm not going to talk much more about that, but if we can go to the next slide, please. So what the EIR did analyze, though, were these 8 distinct areas of potential effect. And obviously level service is not one of those. However, we do have a little bit of level service information at the very end we will share with this commission. Parking is also not considered an impact under CEQA, but I did want to note really quickly that the shared parking analysis that is included in the EIR does result in a 30% reduction in parking needed for the project based on the mix of complementary land uses. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to go through each of these 8 topic areas. These were analyzed under what's known as kind of existing plus project or baseline conditions, and also in a cumulative. The cumulative results are rather similar. So I'm going to focus on our baseline conditions. So next slide, please, Casey. Okay, Impact 312-1 is roadway network VMT impacts. And you may recall, I came before this commission early in 2021 with the city's SB 743 implementation plan. And that plan was then adopted by the city council. And that plan was the guidance we used to then analyze this project in its VMT. And so what we identified in this impact one was that the VMT impacts associated with the proposed project would be less than significant. And the basis for that conclusion, if you look at the bottom right corner, is an image of the city, or the southern part of the city. The area shown in yellow, that's a high quality transit corridor as defined in the technical advisory and through CEQA statutes, as well as areas that are crosshatched represent low VMT generating areas when compared to the regional averages. So when we think about the project being located A, next to high quality transit, and B, in a low VMT generating area, these are exactly the types of recipes that OPR and the technical advisory recommended we consider as presumed less than significant impact. So because there was no significant impact, no mitigation is needed. Next slide, please. So pedestrian facilities, I did want to mention that, as James alluded to, there is a lot of pedestrian facilities being added along the front edge of the project within the site, but some of the pedestrian facilities that are existing along the front edge of the project, specifically lack of certain crosswalks and pedestrian push button equipment, does require the need for additional pedestrian facilities to get individuals from one side of the street to the other. So that was identified as a significant impact, along with potential conflicts associated with vehicles and pedestrians in a couple areas. And so the mitigation was construction of certain improvements, which I will touch on here. I've got some slides at the very end of this that will show, as well as pro rata or fair share funding for certain pedestrian improvements at Sunrise and Greenback Lane. And I'll touch on those as well. Because those are within the city's purview, that's considered a less than significant impact after mitigation. Next. So bicycle facilities, similar to pedestrian, generally speaking, a significant impact. The bike facilities themselves that the project proposes will improve biking relative to current conditions. However, the equipment present along Sunrise and Greenback does not currently provide bike detection, for instance. So bicyclists wouldn't be able to just stand in an area with his or her bike and have a detected green arrow, and also lacks pedestrian or bicycle ingress and egress. So again, the recommendation there is to improve bicycle facilities to get into and out of the project, and with that, less than significant impact. Impact 4 is transit facilities. And I wanted to start by saying that obviously we've talked a lot about the transit center on Sunrise, and clearly it will be an improved condition over what's present at Arcadia. It will probably drive additional overall ridership by virtue of being closer to a greater number of land uses. However, the transit service itself that exists along Sunrise Boulevard, where there are a lot of buses that run northbound and southbound, they are expected to, with the project, experience increases in delay. And as a result of that delay, potential reductions in on-time performance for getting to stops on time. When that happens, we know that transit ridership can drop. So we identified that as a significant impact. And construction of a series of transit improvements on Sunrise Boulevard and Greenback Lane is the recommended mitigation. As Casey mentioned, we've collaborated on multiple occasions with Sacramento Regional Transit on additional improvements along the corridor when they go to implement bus rapid transit. And I will show some of those improvements on an illustration here shortly. And again, because we've coordinated with RT within the city and the applicant's ability to construct less than significant after mitigation. Next. So on-site circulation and access primarily pertains to the ability to get motorists in and out of the site safely, efficiently, and so on and so forth. And with the project itself, being the type of land use it is and the trips it does generate, we did identify the need for certain vehicular improvements entering and exiting the project. I will show those and then discuss how they're going to improve operations as well later. But we've tested their efficiency and reached a conclusion of less than significant. Next. This is similar to the previous statement, but more focused on specifically safety with respect to if a vehicle is doesn't have enough room to queue in a turn lane and is now in the through lane on Greenback Lane. That creates, higher risk for potential rear end collisions and whatnot. And so again, the mitigation for that significant impact was turn lane improvements on Greenback Lane, specifically at the signal at Arcadia Drive, which we'll talk about. Next. And then finally, not finally, but emergency vehicle access. It's important that emergency vehicles be able to quickly enter and exit the site. And we do have a fire station situated less than a mile from the site. The project itself has a number of different access points. So there's many ways to get in and out of the site. And the signals present and the new ones that are going to be constructed with the project will be equipped with signal preemption, which allows the signals to turn green when preempted by emergency vehicles. So with that conclusion was deemed less than significant, no mitigation. And then the final one was temporary construction impacts. The construction of the project involved demolition of the parts of the existing mall over time, as well as bringing in lots of equipment, trucks and whatnot. And so identified as a significant impact, and development of a construction traffic management plan is required, along with prescribed performance standards, which must be met. Those performance standards are described in the Drafty Ir, pertaining to routes of trucks, employee parking, bike lanes being clean, that type of stuff. And with that construction traffic management plan, less than significant impact. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so let me now turn the attention a little bit to the physical improvements. So to address some of the transit delays that we were seeing, we know that the proposed project includes a large amount of office. And so office in the afternoon peak hour outbound trips, typically longer distance, a fair amount heading west on Greenback Lane towards I-80. And so there's already a number of heavy northbound left turn demand. And I apologize, this slide's a little bit difficult to see, but basically the mitigation that we've called upon here is to add a third northbound left turn lane. And so it's the third lane turning left from northbound Sunrise to westbound Greenback. Additionally, we would be extending and building a more lengthy northbound right turn lane, as well as in a more lengthy eastbound right turn lane. Again, eastbound right turn lane would also be an increased movement the project would use. The other thing we're doing at this intersection is making it better for pedestrians. I know you can't read that, but what we're doing at the two crosswalks on the east leg and the south leg is implementing what's known as LPIs, or leading pedestrian intervals. It basically gives the pedestrian a head start so they're more visible in the crosswalk. It's a common treatment we see and something the city's doing elsewhere as well. Next slide, please. So, and again, apologies here. And Casey, if you can, maybe you can just use your cursor to just point to certain things. I cannot do that for my machine here, but basically what we're doing along the Sunrise Boulevard corridor is replacing the signal equipment and lanes that are present at the existing signals that serve Sunrise Mall today with improved lane alignments and signal equipment that will better accommodate travelers. So we're running basically what we'll call protected left turn phasing on the side streets, which means there'll be more green time available to through traffic. We're also, because we're adding this protected left turn phasing, we can now introduce more crosswalks across Sunrise. And you can see those new crosswalks in the orange there at the first signal, on Sunrise, at the most northerly signal. A new signal is, as James mentioned before, a new traffic signal is proposed to be constructed north of Macy Plaza Drive. That provides a greater dispersion of traffic entering and exiting the site than was ever the case at Sunrise Mall. And through coordination of these signals and also having all protected left turn phasing, they can operate in a very efficient way. So that's basically the Sunrise Boulevard improvements. But on that, before I kind of jump over to Greenback Lane, I wanted to also point out that the transit improvements, at the transit center, what we'll do at the new signal is there will be, once the BRT is in place, what's kind of known as a kind of a queue bypass lane. So the buses will be able to bypass stop traffic and get to the transit center turnout sooner to load and unload traffic. And similarly, they'll be able to, at the signal just north of, I guess it's called the birdcage signal, just south of the first signal on Sunrise, south of Greenback Lane, they'll be able to have a queue bypass as well, so that they'll, be able to, beat traffic, so to speak, and get to their destination sooner to improve on-time performance. We coordinated with regional transit on these improvements, and they seem pretty excited about them. And then finally on Greenback, we can. Next, thank you. On the Greenback Lane corridor, the intersection that exists today with Arcadia would be upgraded. The signal phasing would change so that we can operate more efficient signal phasing, and we would introduce a Westlake crosswalk. It'd be easier now to access this project. Instead of having to use 3 crosswalks, you could only use 1 in some instances. And then finally, next slide, please. We did say we did some level service analysis. It's not included in the CEQA document because it's no longer subject to, to CEQA level service significance. But what we did do is we looked at existing conditions, AM peak hour, PM peak hour on a typical weekday, as well as existing plus project. And then with all these improvements I just talked about. And so at Sunrise and Greenback, you can see that we're at D in the morning and E in the evening today. With the project delays worsen. But when we actually add the improvements themselves, we go back to D and D. And I think it's important that we mention that the city's level service policy through arterial streets such as Sunrise and Greenback, although the city does have a level service E policy overall that governs most of its intersections and roadways, it does have exceptions for streets that carry large amounts of non-local traffic. And Sunrise and Greenback, if you recall, we pulled some data from that, from big data long ago, and demonstrated that a pretty substantial amount of traffic, especially on Sunrise, is not Citrus Heights based, it's just through traffic. But despite all this, with these improvements, you can see, and again, this is project build out, level service D. The first intersection south of Sunrise and Greenback, the entry A, street A opposite Birdcage, went to level service F before we did any improvements with the project. However, when the improvements with the project, including adding a second southbound left turn lane, improves that intersection to E. And then as you can see, the other intersections are generally at D, B, E, or E, and Greenback and Arcadia is at level service C and whatnot. So what we found is with this, the improved conditions, we're able to get buses through Sunrise Boulevard in a shorter amount of time by virtue of doing these improvements, and also, try to keep conditions, from deteriorating for the general driving public. So with that, I will turn it back to Casey, who can take it from here. Thanks. Be happy to answer questions at the time. Actually, I will, Casey, I'm not going to say that because I think I'm going to defer to you on that. Thanks.
Sure. So any questions the commission has?
I have a question. I don't understand the terminology incorporated into the project. Does that mean what Mr. McMurtry was talking about is that's going to go into the EIR? So when something's incorporated into the project, it means it's just going to be more that's going to be disclosed? Or what's the meaning of that?
So the improvements that John discussed were initially not part of the project. So by incorporating them and building them into the project, you reduce the impact on the roadway.
Okay, perfect. And then my question number 2, when we were on greenhouse gas, I think it said at operational, we were like 11,000 some odd, which was over, but it didn't really indicate what was considered acceptable. is 8 normal and 11's horrible? Or did you refer to that as we're like a percentage over what is considered acceptable?
I'll let Steve answer that question.
It's a good question. I don't have the threshold here in front of me. I'd have to dig into the data and into the modeling. But basically, there's a certain total quantity, and then it's measured on a per capita basis. And there's sort of an allowance or sort of a normally accepted amount that's allowed for each per capita. And so if you exceed a certain amount, then you're supposed to try to come up with any measures that you can to try to reduce that per capita and the total to a level that's within the standard. And we just weren't able to do that on a project of this size and this amount of density. It's just really not possible to achieve the thresholds. The thresholds are really established, I would say, more for a smaller type of project, for a 20, 30, maybe 100 lot subdivision. Once you go over 100 lot subdivision, you start to get, almost always you run into a significant unavoidable impact just because of the sheer size of the project. But I can get back to you on what exactly that threshold is. It is within the Drafty Ir. I just don't have it here in front of me.
Okay, I was just curious. Thank you.
I have a question. With the mitigations to improve the traffic, like the 3 left turn lanes, the new signal, removing the median, is this going to be implemented as part of the specific plan? I mean, who would pay for it? Would RT pay for it? Would the developer pay for it, or would the city pay for it?
So the way that the mitigation is written is it depends on the improvement. The frontage improvements along the frontage of the mall would be built by the respective property owner when they come in for the development. The portion of the work that is not along the frontage at Greenback and Sunrise would be a pro rata share. So each property owner would pay their fair share to do that signal conversion, their 3rd lane, and other improvements at Sunrise Boulevard in Greenback. And then the city would implement that at the appropriate time.
Well, what property owners? Would Birdcage, Citrus Town Center, would they?
No, it's limited to the mall frontage. So the property owners of this specific plan.
Okay, but so adding a 3rd left turn lane northbound Sunrise to Greenback, the other property owners will not carry the burden of having to pay for that improvement. And is there enough room there to put in a 3rd left turn lane?
The impact is triggered by the mall, so the specific plan. So that is what is driving that improvement, and that's why it's their requirement. The John Gard with Grand Piers looked at the conceptual level version of those improvements, and they would fit within the existing right of way and or on the project site.
Okay, thank you.
What is considered, this is Tom, what is the considered, what is peak PM hour? How long is that? Is that just 1 hour, or is it a span of time?
I'll let John answer that.
Yeah, so we look at the traditional weekday AM peak hour and PM peak hour, and the PM peak hour varies. It's typically the busiest 60 minutes between 4 and 6 p.m. A lot of cities, it's 4:30 to 5:30. Some of it depends on commuting patterns. I think I don't remember the exact 60-minute period off the top of my head, but it is in Drafty Ir, and it's that 1 hour period between 4 and 6 p.m.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Chair, I'd recommend we open the public hearing.
Very good. I will open the public hearing. We're going to have a time period for comments of 3 minutes, and I will tell the speaker when 20 seconds are left.
We do not have any emails in. Stacy, do we have any hands raised?
We do not have any raised hands at this time.
Okay. I would recommend you close the public hearing, and if the Planning Commission has any other questions or would like to make comments, now would be the time.
I close the public hearing. Commissioners, questions or comments? Very important project.
A comment from this commissioner, Paul. So the ER is like 4,000 pages. So whoever wrote that, oh my goodness. So good work on that. And overall, very, very excited for the project. So just a comment.
I have a comment. I think it's a vital project, a very important project, and it's well executed and everything. My question, and it might just be rhetorical, but I'm thinking about the other special project area in Citrus Heights, which is Stock Ranch. That has been in development for, I think, almost 10 years now, and it's really not built out. What happens if there's not as much interest from developers as anticipated on this?
Well, that is a job that Megan and I have been working hard on in the background, and there is a huge amount of development interest from very large developers in this project site. So as of right now, we don't have that problem. I think there's a lot of interest in it. It's just a different dynamic too, and a different intensity than Stock Ranch is a little bit of an older style model of how development happens. And this is a little bit more unique, a different makeup. So I think it's kind of a little bit of apples and oranges.
Okay, thank you.
Any comments for the EIR? No. I think that's all I have for you tonight, Chair.
I just wanted to take a moment to echo Commissioner McNoski's comment. Obviously, the environmental document is quite a document, 4,000 pages, but the 3,500 of those are basically all the various reports that are attached and whatever else. So it's only 500 pages, to read the actual document EIR. So anybody can read that in a night. I do echo the comment. I think it's great work. There's a tremendous amount of technical expertise and vision and whatever that's gone into this. And I give all the credit to all the consultants and all the staff, and certainly to all the community that has participated and given their comments. And I continue to urge people to please submit their comments and make this better. So thank you. If we have any other comments? If not, I will close the meeting.
We just needed to finish out. We just have to read the next couple of items. We just have, if you want me to go ahead and read the next item, sir?
I'm sorry, please.
That's okay. Planning manager comments. Casey, did you have anything to add tonight?
None.
Okay, thank you. And then that concludes the meeting. I have nothing further.
All right, very well. Now I will close the meeting. Thank you much for everybody and all their commitment, and looking forward to this great project.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Have a good night.